Traveling to the Wild West was not simple, but folks were prepared for anything. From gold seekers to families looking for new chances, people tried a variety of methods to reach those vast, untamed territories. Some rode horses, others used wagons, and a few even boarded trains or boats. The journey was filled with challenges, adventure, and hope. Let's look at 20 different ways people journeyed to the Wild West and how they became part of American history. But before we do, please subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. 20. Barrel boats and bull boats. Well, imagine you're on the wild frontier with no Uber or kayak shop, just a herd of buffalo and a dream. So what do? You grab some willow branches, drape a buffalo hide over them, and voila! You've got a bull boat. It's like a hairy bathtub floating. Consider cruising down the Missouri River in what essentially amounts to a massive buffalo skin cereal dish. Stylish? No. Effective? Somehow, yeah. These things were light, about 30 pounds. You may toss one over your shoulder and continue walking. Then, frontiersmen got imaginative, and perhaps a little overconfident, and created gigantic versions, up to 30 feet long, sewn from numerous hides. They could transport tons of fur, but let's be honest, they were essentially water rodeo rides. Lewis and Clark claimed they bobbed around like a cork. Translation: seasickness is guaranteed. Still, if you've ever wanted to do a river tour in cowboy style, this was it. Simply trade your life jacket for buckskin and hope for the best. 19. Wind wagons. When the horses were fatigued and the wind picked up, some pioneers became inventive. In 1860, Samuel Peppard, a Kansas farmer, developed a cart with sails. Yes, a real-life wagon and sailboat combination. This device had 4 wheels, 2 large sails, and weighed approximately 350 pounds. It looked like a wagon attempting to masquerade as a pirate ship, but it worked. Peppard and his friends sailed across the Great Plains, reaching 30 miles per hour on windy days. One newspaper employee timed them at 2 miles and 14 minutes. Not bad for a DIY prairie rocket. They traveled over 500 miles with nothing but wind, and perhaps munchies. Of course, once the dust storms arrived, the enjoyment ended. These objects almost took flight like kites. Still, for a short time, the Wild West had its own strange, windy version of NASCAR. 18. Travois. Before roads and carts, there was the travois, which was just 2 sticks strung together in a large A-form with your belongings strapped in the middle. No wheels? No problem. Simply drag it behind a dog or a horse. Plains tribes utilize these frequently to relocate their camps. And yes, it worked pretty well on dry land. Think of it as the original backpack on skis, but for dogs. By the late 1700s, even traders were utilizing them. One writer claimed that sled dogs could travel up to 100 miles each day. That's a tough dog workout. Someone give those pups a reward. Horses then pulled larger travois, carrying hefty cargo when carts were not an option. No wheels meant no traces, only paw prints and hooves in the dust. It may have appeared rudimentary, but out on the frontier, this was a 5-star relocation service. 17. The camel caravan. Believe it or not, camels once marched over the American Southwest. Yes, real camels. With humps and attitude. In the 1850s, the United States Army had a strange idea. Hey, what if we use camels instead of mules to haul stuff through the desert? So, in 1855, Congress approved it, and a ship arrived in Texas with 33 large, cranky camels from Arabia and Central Asia. Locals were like, "What in the dusty world is that?" It turns out that these camels were as hardy as nails. They could carry heavy weights, drank little water, and tolerated the heat. The horses were sweating profusely, while the camels continued to flaunt like desert divas. For a while, you could witness camel caravans transporting mail and supplies across the Texas plains and all the way to Santa Fe. However, just as the camel initiative was gaining momentum, the railroad emerged. Trains made camels look like old news, so Uncle Sam said, "Hey, never mind." What happened with the camels? Some people went to zoos, others joined circuses, a few just wandered away. One even developed a legend, the Red Ghost, a massive red-haired camel who roamed Arizona like a shaggy ghost on a quest. People claimed it was haunted. Here's a spoiler. It was not just a very perplexed and very hairy camel. If you ever find yourself in Quartzsite, Arizona, you can pay a visit to the tomb of Hi Jolly, where one of the camel herders is buried. A real guy, Haji Ali's real name. Americans couldn't pronounce it, so they renamed him Hi Jolly. So while the camel idea did not catch on, it did leave an impression. A large, 2-toed, camel-shaped one. 16. Dog sled teams. When the north froze solid and snow piled up like whipped cream on a dessert, sled dogs saved the day. In the late 1800s, during the Yukon and Alaska gold rush, There were no roads, trucks, or Amazon Prime. It's just snow. Plenty of snow. So how did people move around? Dog sledding teams? Big, fluffy huskies pulled wooden sleds through snowstorms as if they had somewhere to go, and they did. These puppies were more than simply cute. They were strong, swift, and extremely intelligent. Prospectors, traders, and local postal carriers relied on them to transport mail, supplies, gold, and even people across frozen land. During the Klondike Gold Rush, which included 100,000 gold-hungry dreamers, sled dogs dragged everything through snow so thick that you'd lose your hat simply looking at it. A good dog team can go 50 to 100 miles per day, even in blizzards. That's like running many marathons while dragging your boss behind you on a sled. No pressure, right? According to one report in an Alaska newspaper, a postal team was chased by wolves and outran them. That email was absolutely delivered. Forget FedEx. This was Furex. Of course, there's the legend of Balto, the sled dog who helped save Nome in 1925 by leading a team through harsh weather to deliver life-saving medicine during a diphtheria epidemic. Absolute legend. Complete good boy status. The Iditarod race is still held today to honor those brave dogs and their mushers. It's a wild 1,000-mile journey across Alaska's snow and mountains, following the same tracks that Gold Rush mushers previously used. So, the next time your car won't start in the snow, remember that sled dogs used to do it in negative 40 degrees, while wearing boots. Absolute legends on 4 legs. 15. Mule and ox teams. Let's be honest, everyone wants a horse. Horses were quick, flamboyant, and cool. But out on the frontier, you were lucky to have a saddle, let alone a stallion. Most settlers had to settle with mules and oxen. Yep, not glamorous, but wow, could they haul. Mules were the cranky teenagers of the animal kingdom. Strong, headstrong, and intelligent. Oxen? They were gigantic, slow-moving tanks. These individuals were the true engines of the Oregon Trail. In 1853, a wagon driver remarked, "We don't have horses. The only thing left was an old mule." And the mule undoubtedly gave him side-eye the entire journey west. Settlers were frequently trading animals like Pokemon cards. So, your horse died? Here, take this mule. He bites less. Oxen were slow, moving only 10 to 20 miles each day. They didn't require special oats, only grass and water. Mules were better on tough terrain, as sure-footed as mountain goats, but with more attitude. Diaries on the Oregon Trail contain several love-hate stories about these creatures. One moment you're thanking your ox for taking you across a river, and the next you're cursing at it for sitting in the middle of a trail. True frontier drama. Cartoonists then quipped that a wagon drawn by oxen was simply an Amish Uber, and they were not wrong. Slow travel, no music, no snacks, but at least you got to Oregon. Pioneer families learned 2 important lessons. Never trust a mule who appears overly joyful. Second, always be kind to your ox, because that walking tank is pulling your entire future behind it. 14. Mormon handcarts. Okay, most pioneers had wagons while others had oxen or mules. What about the Mormon handcart pioneers? They had none of that. They were the powerhouse, literally. In the late 1850s, approximately 3,000 Mormon pioneers from Europe arrived in America with immense aspirations and limited resources. They could not afford carts or animals, so what did they do? They fashioned wooden handcarts, loaded them with all of their belongings, blankets, pots, food, and occasionally even children, and began dragging them themselves. It was the world's most difficult Costco run. On flat terrain, one person can drag 100 to 150 pounds. Uphill, maybe 60 to 75 pounds if you're lucky. And this wasn't a simple journey. They walked almost 1,300 miles from Iowa to Utah. It's like hauling your bags from New York to Miami. Without wheels, wearing a bonnet. Each family got their cart and everyone pitched in. Dad pulled, Mom pushed, and the kids hoped it didn't tip over. But here's where things went ugly. In 1856, 2 groups left too late in the season. The Willie and Martin firms were trapped in early snowstorms in Wyoming. They continued hauling the carts despite the freezing temperatures and lack of food. Over 200 individuals died, many of them from weariness. Rescue troops eventually arrived with ox carts and blankets and transported the survivors to Salt Lake City. Total heroes. People in Utah still remember this dramatic experience. Every Pioneer Day, children recreate the handcart voyage. Don't worry, they don't cover the entire 1,300 miles. It's a story of faith, guts, and strong calf muscles. So, next time you moan about bringing groceries up the stairs, remember, some people hauled a complete household across the Rocky Mountains by hand. 13. The Wheelbarrow Man. Okay, get this. In 1878, A man called R. Lyman Potter from Albany, New York, determined that walking cross-country was not difficult enough. Nope. He sought a challenge. So, what did he do? He created a massive wooden wheelbarrow, threw his belongings in it, and declared, "I'm going to push this thing all the way to San Francisco. That's more than 4,000 miles. On foot. Only he and his shaky one-wheeled wagon. He walked 25 miles every day, took Sundays off since even crazy journeys require a day of rest, and continued across rivers, mountains, and who knows what. People felt he had lost his marbles, but newspapers adored him. They dubbed him the Wheelbarrow Man. And the greatest part? He turned it into a side hustle. He delivered letters from families on the East Coast to those out west for 25 cents each. Talk about traditional postal service with upper body strength. How about as a snack? Popcorn. Yes, he munched on popcorn while lugging a cart across the country. When he finally arrived in San Francisco, everybody cheered like he had just won the Super Bowl. Let's be honest, he probably never wanted to see another wheelbarrow again. But hey, legend status is obtained. 12. Covered wagons. Do you remember the famous pioneer image? A wagon with a white canvas top, traveling over the prairie? Yeah, it was just as sluggish and uncomfortable as it appeared. These were known as prairie schooners, and they moved at speeds ranging from 8 to 20 miles per day. Roughly the same as a drowsy turtle. A complete vacation to Oregon or California? 2,000 miles and 6 months of dust, bruised buttocks, and pretty terrible stew. Inside the wagon? Nope, not luxurious. Only wooden seats that gave everyone a chiropractor's nightmare. Most people walked beside the wagon, even the fathers, because the ride was so bumpy it felt like sitting on a jackhammer. Dinner? Usually beans, salty pork, and stew that had clearly seen better days. Sleeping? Everyone just slumped under the stars, hoping it wouldn't rain. Rivers were the worst. Crossing them required loading your entire wagon onto a floating log raft and hoping it didn't sink halfway across. Families had to deal with rattlesnakes, wildfires, infections, and the incessant creaking of wagon wheels. And when did they ultimately make it? The wagon was disassembled for wood. No return trip, guys. It was harsh, wild, and resembled the worst road trip ever, except with more dysentery and fewer snacks. 11. Stagecoaches. Before the trains arrived, this was the fastest trip in town, if you consider 5 miles per hour fast. The Wells Fargo stagecoach was the Wild West's equivalent of a bullet train, but with more dust and back agony. It featured 4 horses up front, 8 cramped people inside, and a shotgun-wielding man riding on top in case the bandits had any strange ideas. People laughed about how firm and bouncy the seats were, like a human maraca. But hey, you'd stop every 10 miles or so to swap out tired horses for fresh ones. Similar to a pit stop, assuming your pit crew consisted of only 2 sweaty ranch workers. If the ride didn't rattle your teeth, nature might. Storms, wolves, bandits, or even a wheel falling off in the middle of the mountain. The guard with a shotgun? His employment was truly called riding shotgun. Yes, that is where the word came from. Even Mark Twain rode one, describing it as a tin box on wheels. Basically, loud, painful, and no cup holders. Once trains arrived, stagecoaches were immediately parked for good, probably with a sigh of relief down everyone's spine. 10. Riverboats and flatboats. Before highways and carts, waterways served as the primary transportation routes. Without GPS, simply go with the flow, literally. To travel down rivers like the Ohio, early immigrants utilized flatboats, which were large wooden rafts with roofs. You'd throw in your kids, your furniture, and possibly a confused pig, and drift for hundreds of kilometers. Once you arrive at your destination, you may utilize the boat as firewood or to build your house. That is why it was dubbed the boat that never came back. One trip, one way, no refunds. Then came the real game changers, steamboats. By 1811, massive paddle wheelers puffed up the Mississippi like floating hotels. They had dance halls and saloons, and there were fewer mosquitoes than when camping. Going upriver no longer felt like a death sentence, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. The boilers occasionally exploded. One moment you're sipping lemonade, the next you're in the air with your bags. Compared to riding in a wagon, riverboats were a luxury tour with a slight probability of fireworks. 9. Trail-pounding pioneers. Let's be clear, most pioneers did not travel in the wagon as VIPs. Nope. They walked, a lot, like a human Fitbit on overdrive. Everyone, from tough-as-nails parents to toddlers in slings, needed to move their feet. Wagons were lumpy, wooden monsters with no suspension, so strolling beside them was actually better. At least your spine did not curve into a question mark. Diaries tell that as boots wore thin, as they always did, people got imaginative. Some people wrapped their feet in fabric, others simply walked barefoot. By the time the youngsters arrived in Oregon, their feet had thick calluses that most likely scared snakes away. Don't even think they sat in the wagon. That seat is meant for supplies, not bums. Many people walked the entire 2,000-mile route without sitting once. Imagine walking from New York to California with no snacks or podcasts, only dust, perspiration, and the occasional irate cow. Musicians made a joke about their handcart ancestors. He carried his life in a basket and still wouldn't ask for a ride. That's obstinate. Even the renowned explorer, John C. Fremont, that guy walked 20 to 30 kilometers before breakfast, as if it were a warm-up. Meanwhile, the rest of us are fighting to find the drive to get up. These walkers were capable of covering 15 to 20 kilometers a day, outpacing even oxen. Although it was the most difficult and time-consuming mode of transportation, it was necessary when a horse was unavailable or a mule broke down. You laced up or did not and simply strolled. They say frontier grit was measured by worn-out boots, trail dust, and raw leg force. Is there no road? Not an issue. These people walked the journey, one aching foot at a time. 8. The mighty Mississippi paddle wheelers. Back then, if you wanted to travel or move something down the river, you either floated downstream and prayed, or gave up on going upstream entirely. But then came the steamboat, a loud, smoky wooden marvel that transformed waterways into roads. After Robert Fulton invented steamboats in 1807, these floating giants began appearing on America's rivers like celebrity visitors at a barn dance. By 1811, a boat named the New Orleans was puffing her way up the Mississippi, and people were shouting, "You mean we don't have to row anymore?" Steamboats had massive paddle wheels, plenty of cargo room, and sometimes even dancing halls. They resembled floating hotels combined with steam engines and a dash of mayhem. People might sit in rocking chairs on the upper deck, play cards downstairs, and yet arrive faster than walking or riding oxen. Some captains even raced these things. Yes, enormous wooden boats packed with passengers and freight, at 20 miles per hour like river cowboys with a desire for speed. Yes, sometimes the boilers exploded. That was less enjoyable. These steamboats transported everything: flour, animals, furniture, and even families. Merchants stowed goods in the hold, while children ran wild on the deck and someone inevitably played out-of-tune music on the calliope, the loud pipe organ that sounded like a circus, which caused seasickness. You couldn't stop a steamboat very quickly. What if you missed your dock? Bad luck. Better jump or wave from the riverbank as if your hat was on fire. But they were comfortable, especially compared to bouncing around in a wagon. You could stretch your legs, drink some coffee, and forget about snakes and prairie dust for once. Trains and diesel engines eventually supplanted the huge riverboats, and they disappeared into history. But even today, you can board a restored steamer and experience the old-timey river charm. Just do not challenge anyone to a boiler race. Safety comes first, people. 7. Penny farthings and velocipedes. Believe it or not, bicycles made it into the Wild West. Yes, there, amongst the covered wagons and saloons, courageous folks tried to balance on what appeared to be circus equipment. These were hardly the comfortable bikes you see at the park today. Oh no. We're talking about penny farthings, which are motorcycles with a large front wheel and a tiny baby wheel in the rear. Imagine a cowboy in a hat and boots riding that beast across the prairie. It's hilarious, right? By the 1870s and 1980s, many were giving it a chance. Some even rode cross-country. One man, Thomas Stevens, biked across America and around the world on a penny farthing. He did not even have Google Maps, only guts and very aching thighs. There were also velocipedes, affectionately known as bone shakers, because every time you strike a bump, your entire skeleton shakes. These were popular in mining areas, likely because miners were already accustomed to pain. What about the roads? Let's just say they weren't very bicycle-friendly. Sand, gravel, snakes, and don't forget the infamous Arizona holes. People used to refer to potholes as being so large that they could swallow your bike in pride. Without the bumps and bruises, bicycles provided a sense of freedom. There's no need to feed the horse, no saddle soreness. Simply get on and go. Some mailmen even used bicycles to deliver messages, assuming they didn't crash halfway there. There's even an old cartoon of a cowboy chasing outlaws on his bike. It looks silly, but also fantastic. So, while bicycles were not the kings of the trail, they did bring some wheel-powered oddity to the Wild West. 6. Sailing around Cape Horn. Before trains, planes, or even the thought of a Panama Canal, individuals had one crazy method to get to California from the East Coast: sail all the way around the bottom of South America. There are no shortcuts, just the lengthy, windy, wave-smacking path around Cape Horn. Gold fever was a real thing back then. Everyone wanted to make it big in California. So many people signed up for maritime voyages on tall, narrow ships called clippers. Does it sound romantic? Only if romance means 6 months of seasickness, storms, and scurvy. In 1847, the journey from New York to Monterey, California, took 198 days. That's over half a year. On the boat, with hardwood floors, canvas sails, and no Wi-Fi, just wind, water, and a lot of other seasick gold seekers crowded into cramped confines that smelled, let's just say, not good. They had to deal with frigid storms near Patagonia, floating icebergs, and long stretches of ocean where the wind had died. Imagine sitting in the middle of nowhere for days, with nothing but the sound of people whining and the odor of dirty socks. What about pirates? They were a thing. Not the cool movie sort, but real ones. Plus, if the food ran out or went bad, which it often did, scurvy was always ready to greet you. No oranges or lemons, just sad sailors with vitamin problems. By the time they reached San Francisco, many captains were like, "Nope, never again," and just left their ships in the bay. Some never even bothered to sail them back. The ships just sat there, rotting like ship-shaped ghosts. But believe it or not, this sea route was still considered safer than crossing deserts or fighting through wild terrain on land. Overland trails were packed with wagons, animals, and people arguing over whose turn it was to cook beans again. So the sea, even with storms and pirates, seemed like the better deal. It was long, cramped, a little gross, and very risky. But hey, if it got you to the gold, people were willing to float for it. 5. The Isthmus Shortcut. If sailing across South America took too long, some courageous, or perhaps just impatient, travelers attempted a shorter route, the Panama Shortcut. That seems smart, doesn't it? Simply cruise down to Panama, cut through the jungle, and embark on another ship to San Francisco. California, here we come. In principle, it would save months. In 1852, this new route allowed travelers to travel from New York to San Francisco in around 43 days. That was like lightning speed back then. Compared to the 6-month Cape Horn ordeal, it was practically first-class travel. But there's a catch. What about the shortcut? Yes, it went directly through a steamy, mosquito-infested, disease-ridden forest. This was not a casual nature hike. We're talking wild jungle, with heat that could fry your head, swarms of bugs attempting to eat you alive, and trails that weren't even actual trails, just muck, roots, and total pandemonium. People were forced to walk through this mess or ride on the back of a cantankerous mule who most likely despised them. There were rivers to traverse, hills to climb, and don't forget the delightful little keepsake known as malaria. Oh, and yellow fever too. Even former President John Quincy Adams was nearly killed by tropical sickness years ago. His ghost likely waved sadly as tourists dragged themselves through the muddy misery. Still, gold fever drives people to do crazy things. Desperate miners paid exorbitant fees to get through this rainforest in order to get to California faster. If they were lucky enough to make it out of the jungle, they'd board a riverboat or paddle steamer and cruise across Panama to the other side before jumping on another ship headed north. That, friends, was their version of a layover. The entire experience was reminiscent of 19th century air travel, but instead of airport security and wailing babies, there were machetes, wild animals, and tropical diseases. No peanuts. There is no legroom, simply sweat, bugs, and hope. When the transcontinental train was completed in 1869, followed by the Panama Canal in 1914, the entire jungle experience went away. But in the 1840s and 1950s, it was newsworthy. A perilous, hot, and expensive shortcut that beat floating at the bottom of the world for 6 months. Fast? Yes. Fun? Not even close. Worth it? Only if you really desired that California gold. 4. Railroad handcars. Back in the old days when trains didn't show up, or just weren't invented yet for that stretch, people didn't wait around. They grabbed a handcar and pumped themselves down the tracks. Yup, we're talking about those little rail carts you see in old cartoons. 2 people pumping a handle up and down like they're doing a weird workout. And somehow, that made the thing move. That's a railroad handcar, also called a pump trolley. At first, they were used by workers to patrol the tracks. Gotta check for broken rails, missing spikes, cows napping on the line, you know, the usual. But sometimes, they were used to carry actual passengers. No joke, if a train wasn't available and you really needed to get somewhere, you and a few friends hopped on one of them, grabbed the handle, and began pumping. These wooden carts did not have seats or roofs, simply a flat deck on rollers. You'd stand there with your luggage or perhaps your horse saddle, clutching on for dear life as a couple of others handled all the heavy lifting. Perhaps you had to take turns pumping. Congratulations, you've just become the engine. They were not fast, A few miles per hour on a good day. Nonetheless, they were effective. 4 persons at the pump could move a few hundred pounds of mail, or even a dozen hot, slightly confused travelers. Talk about teamwork. No whistles, no coal, and no comfortable seats. Only a seesaw handle, some determination, and the hope that no one unintentionally launches themselves off the back. Hand cars saved lives in crises or in remote locations. No engine? Not an issue. Just start pumping. If you had strong arms and didn't mind a little wind in your face and possibly a few bugs in your teeth, it was preferable to sitting around waiting. Yes, it was bumpy. Yes, it was exhausting. But if you squinted hard enough, it felt like you were racing across the frontier, propelled by friendship, muscle, and desperation. So, the next time you grumble about traffic, remember that someone previously had to pump their way to town with their own 2 hands. This is cowboy-style commuting. 3. Dugout canoes. Before aircraft, trains, and even noisy carts, folks in the Pacific Northwest had one major travel rule. If it floats, it travels. This is where the dugout canoe comes in. Basically, take a massive cedar tree, hollow it out like a large wooden hot dog bun, and you've got a ride. These objects were not small either. Some were more than 30 feet long, large enough to accommodate 4 to 6 grown men, as well as a pile of supplies, blankets, food, gear, and possibly even a cranky dog. And guess what? They weighed a ton, literally. Getting into the water was certainly a workout in itself. Indigenous groups had used these canoes for thousands of years. They've perfected it. They paddled smoothly, had great balance, and could even maneuver through fast-moving rapids like professionals. Later, adventurers like Lewis and Clark arrived, witnessed the enchantment, and remarked, "Yep, we're gonna need one of those." So what did they do? They made their own dugout canoes from scratch. It was either that or swim. And rivers like the Columbia and Snake aren't exactly tranquil waters. These rivers contained dangerous currents, concealed rocks, and more drama than a soap opera. The canoes were shallow enough to avoid sandbars and sturdy enough to handle whitewater. Some were even stocked with fur pelts by Hudson's Bay Company agents. It appears that beaver fashion was in, and, believe it or not, when paddled by a strong team, these canoes could travel as quickly as a galloping horse. That isn't terrible for a tree in disguise. But wait, it gets better. In the winter, some Oregon pioneers were so daring that they utilized dugout canoes as makeshift snowboards. No skis? Not an issue. Simply flip your canoe and surf the snow like a pioneer pro. Talk about multitasking. Of course, the massive dugout had its limitations. One day, Lewis and Clark's expedition encountered a tough area in the Snake River Gorge. The rapids were so wild, the canoes practically shouted, "Nope!" So the crew did what any fatigued explorer would do. They lifted up the entire canoe, carried it on their shoulders, and trekked it inland. That's correct. They carried a twisted wooden canoe as if it were a bag from hell. So, dugout canoes were not always glamorous. They came without a captain, cup holders, or even seats. But when rivers were highways and horses couldn't swim, these massive cedar baths saved lives. 2. Hot air balloons. The Wild West already had cowboys, saloons, rattlesnakes, and runaway wagons. But believe it or not, it also featured hot air balloons. Yes, there are floating fire bubbles in the sky. Ballooning didn't originate in America. It began in 1783 in France. Over there, some people stared at the fire, then at the fabric and exclaimed, "Let's fly." Strangely enough, it worked. Then in 1793, America gave it a try. Dr. John Jeffries and Jean-Pierre Blanchard, 2 daring or absolutely insane men, boarded a hydrogen balloon, yes, the kind that may explode, and soared from Philadelphia to New Jersey. First manned balloon flight in the United States. And certainly, people believed they were real wizards. Let's go on to the Wild West. Imagine a dusty cowboy in Nevada looks up to see a balloon drifting across the sky. He's squinting and tipping his cap, unsure whether it's a flying buffalo or some kind of French wizardry. People weren't sure what to think. Is that a giant floating egg? Nope, just Larry trying to beat traffic. Balloons were never really the FedEx of the frontier. They did not transport mail over the plains or deliver Amazon goods to mine sites. But they demonstrated something incredible. Humans could float through the skies with nothing but a gigantic sack of hot air and some fire under their boots. That concept blew everyone's minds. Of course, balloon exhibitions quickly became popular in mining towns and fairs. These were similar to the classic air shows, but with much slower speeds and more mustaches. Balloon circuses would come through, light the burners, and people would pay good money to see some person float 50 feet into the air while waving his hat. Entertainment was different back then. Sure, balloons didn't exactly revolutionize westward travel, No one was ditching their wagon for a hot air ride. They did, however, elicit some excitement. Rumors quickly spread. Did you hear old MacGyver traded a bottle of whiskey just to ride in one at the county fair? No way! Swear on my spittoon. As wagons moved on the ground, a few daring balloonists hovered high above the prairies, giving a touch of sky-high oddity to the Wild West. Not practical, not common, but it's completely great. 1. The Iron Horse. Now, drumroll please, we made it to the big one, the best of old-school travel. The MVP of the 1800s, the one and only, the Transcontinental Railroad, or the Iron Horse, as it was affectionately known back then. Before this bad boy arrived, going across the United States was an adventure. Months of walking, wagon riding, crying, praying, and possibly losing at least one boot in a river. But suddenly, boom! In 1869, the game changed forever. On May 10th, two gigantic rail lines finally met in the middle, Omaha to Sacramento, all linked by a single long stretch of steel rail. Approximately 2,000 miles of sparkling track connected the country like a massive metal zipper. What about the golden spike they pounded in at the finish line? Oh, that was practically the 1800s equivalent of launching a rocket. Suddenly, a journey from San Francisco to New York did not require 3 months, 6 horses, and a bag of miracles. You can now do it in roughly a week, with a seat, and perhaps even soup. But it wasn't simply about transferring people. Trains transported everything: gold, cattle, furniture, filthy miners, love letters, you name it. Whole families could now travel west without needing to wrestle a buffalo beforehand. To get over mountains like the Rockies and Sierra Nevada, they built massive trestles, cut tunnels, and even made wooden snow sheds to keep the tracks from disappearing under snow. These builders were serious, and it's probably freezing. What about the trains? Loud, smoky, and wonderful. They puffed and chugged their way through the untamed frontier as if they owned it, which, to be honest, they sort of did. By the 1880s, these rail lines had connected nearly every dusty frontier settlement. Whistles, telegraph poles, and station masters screaming about delays replaced tumbleweeds and crickets in little communities. It was a completely fresh vibe. No more relying on ox carts, wagons, or the old practice of hope and walking. Now it was all about steam, speed, and munchies in the dining car. When the final spike was hammered in, it accomplished more than merely finishing the railroad. It brought to an end the plodding, sweaty, wagon-filled turmoil of the pioneer era. The Wild West did not disappear. It just started arriving on time. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon for the latest updates.